Okay, after quite an absence because of all the nonsense, we're back here recording again. So, how are you, Bruce?
I'm terrific. And yourself, Ed?
Good, good. I'm just struck by. Here we go again. It's been at least a couple of major election cycles where these folks that run these polls that are far more educated than I am and went to far better schools than I did seem to be getting it wrong. And they're getting it wrong not just in the major stuff. Well, everything's major to people, but even a lot of these local things and everything. And I think it probably is something that goes beyond politics in a sense. But this whole notion of polling, I'm wondering, two things: what's going on, what's wrong, and secondly, who needs them?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, for our viewers, we're talking polls, Polls, not polls, Poles. So get Lech Walesa and Pope Paul out of your head and start thinking politics, religion, products and services. Research.
Clarification. Because I was confused.
Well, a bad joke is still a joke. Just nobody laughs. Anyway,
even if it was a great joke, you wouldn't hear the laughter.
Right? That's a separate topic. Comedians
the next one
that are doing this stuff without an audience, and I think that must take a lot of courage because they have no idea what's funny and what's not at a certain point. I mean, they know what's funny to them.
All right.
Getting back to polling, not polls. We've come a long way since the George Gallup opinion polls of the 40s and 50s. And, we come out of advertising. We live by that polling data. Toothpaste, magazine, media, who read, what they looked like, what they liked about it, but polling has become so ubiquitous and pervasive that I think for many people it defines what's happening or reinforces kind of their thinking as opposed to looking for insight and understanding. It's got this tremendous visibility, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can barely read a newspaper or a magazine or some website without them claiming this poll. But remember, they're talking to hundreds or thousands of people and trying to project to millions or tens of millions. So it's and like we needed a reminder.
Well, Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that sometimes it's maybe missing the point of some of the things that are most obvious, and who knows if they're even asking the right questions, or they're asking questions that they want to get certain answers for. I mean, we know that certainly from the marketing world, the art of how to ask a question. And the other part of it too is a poll is a flashpoint, just in a nick of time in terms of here's what that person's thinking or thinks they're thinking at that moment. And the moment it's in a poll, it's already passed. It's history. And with things so dynamic, with so much information coming in, going out all the time, it is very hard to figure out to what degree do they really believe some of this stuff, if they believe it at all. And especially in the political arena, where there's probably an awful lot of fear in terms of, I don't think I want to even say what I'm thinking right now, or I'm not even sure I know what I'm thinking. But what's scary is that you've got, forget companies for a second, you've got politicians trying to make policy off of polls, as opposed to their job, as like anybody's, is to really understand what's going on in their marketplace and not to be dictated by, this thing that we think is scientific, but clearly has had its pants pulled down lately.
Yeah, well, listen, certainly lately, how about 1948? Right? Dewey versus Truman. and then you've got 4 years ago, and then you've got again this year. Although I think you could argue the polls were largely correct this year in terms of selection, margin was the issue.
Margin was the issue, but they also got a lot of the more localized races wrong.
Right. But again, as marketers and brand builders, this is just one tool, and at times a fairly blunt tool.
Yeah. Do you think polls should be allowed? I mean, listen, this is just this is like two old guys talking about anything. But do you think in this ideal world, who needs them for this political stuff? I mean,
Well,
I'm a voter. Why do I need to know what some lame poll is right now, as opposed to I need to really figure out what the issues are and vote based upon what I believe in?
Well, in terms of political polling, I agree with you. I think it just feeds into bandwagon thinking.
Yeah.
Or I don't need to participate because, they've already told me the outcome.
Exactly.
This idea that, it's starting to define what's happening as opposed to reinforcing people's thinking.
Exactly.
That is my biggest issue with it right now, especially as it relates to political polling.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it's up to every American to decide what issues are important to them and their family, see where the politicians stand on those issues, regardless of party, and make a decision that's appropriate for them and their community and the country as a whole, one would hope. Probably in that order. But that's not what happens.
Well, no, it's not what happens. But it's interesting because I was reading something not too long ago that talked about sort of like in the good old days, what politicians were very good at, especially on that more localized level, knocking on doors, talking to people. It's almost like their version of focus groups. Good focus groups that, where you're getting qualitative information as opposed to quantitative, but you're getting insights. You're getting a feel for what is going on. That in a company, a lot of the senior folks will pretend or think they know what's going on because they've read some statistics, but they're completely divorced and away from their customers and don't really get that real sense of feel of the value of their own company provides to their constituents and their customers. So, the whole notion of your local leaders, and many of them I know in our town are, but more and more should be out there and talk to people and really find out what's going on in their minds, as opposed to now it's kind of sitting back, this information coming in, this data coming in. I'm able to get my face on whatever cable news network there is to talk about some of this stuff. And meanwhile, it's almost giving this false sense of science behind it because there's numbers behind it. And those numbers aren't reflecting the real true depth of feeling and emotions that are really influencing that dynamic.
Well, at the core of these models, and that's what they are, they're models, are demographic data. And they assume that if you're, this age, this gender, this well-educated, you live in this geography, you make this kind of money, that this is how you're going to behave. I mean, that's the whole idea of those models.
Yeah, I know.
And, and when things get more emotional, those models become less useful.
And that's a very interesting insight because we're I think the one thing we can all agree on, we're in a pretty emotional time. We're in a pretty emotional time. To the point of it's driving a lot of irrationality. But it is what it is,
Well, I remember I briefly worked on Nissan on a special project. And they wanted to do a better job of the women's market. Prior to that, while women bought cars, the assumption was they brought their husband, father, boyfriend to help make the decision, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, you would think that was 50 years ago. It wasn't. Okay, it's a lot
No,
closer,
it's pretty recent.
right? So, you're doing all this research. So you're doing qualitative, you're doing all sorts of quantitative, and then you go in and you're at the dealerships around the country listening to the salespeople talk, and then you're like sitting there as a quote unquote trainee to watch these transactions unfold. And at the end of the day, you heard things like, well, but can I get it in red? Or can I get, what the decision-making process was just so much different than what they had traditionally known, that they were ill-prepared to deal with it. They're still talking about RPMs and torque,
Right.
and these people were ride and look and, and fashion and color. So it became and could you see yourself in it? And, in those days, ads still predominantly were, that 20 something or 30 something driving the car,
Yeah.
especially, or teenagers or 20 somethings at the entry level.
Right.
My point remains the same. It's just a tool, this research. And the idea that we're allowing research to dictate behavior instead of unearthing behavior through research is disturbing. And I may be a curmudgeon.
No, you're not a curmudgeon.
But polling is this, especially when it comes to certain topics for me. Religion, are you Catholic, Protestant? How often do you attend? Do you believe in God? I mean, I guess those are interesting topics, but again, at a certain point, it starts to define the behaviors that it purports to report on.
Well, I think especially in the political arena, it tends to get the folks off the mark, that regardless of whether you're conservative, liberal, or whatever, your job is the protection of the people you're serving. And also their needs are really usually pretty basic stuff. Do I feel safe? Am I able to have a good living for myself and my family? Am I going to have the freedoms that I think are guaranteed to me? And also be protected to an extent that makes sense. And then you get off on all these other little different things here and there. I even remember during our Cigna days when we did some interesting research, which was, I think we had one of those staff meetings and I saw everybody with their Coach bags. And those were the men, by the way. And I realized, man, I was getting mad because we're too divorced from the people we're serving. So what was the research? Go out and ride subways, go out and bowl, go out and observe people in a mall and whatever, and really observe what are they talking about. And when people came back, they said, well, they really weren't talking about us at all. Of course, that's the point. They were talking about things that are important in their life. They observed some conversations about a Little League game or Girl Scout meeting, all this stuff that somehow gets lost when you're at the strategic level of this big insurance company, but are so important because it's important in their lives and you play that role in it. So, I'm not trying to overly simplify this stuff, but with all this polling, and I don't care whether it's, mainly in the political arena, they're outsourcing their insights, and that's their job. Their job, if you're a representative, if you're a head marketer, it's your job to understand the insights for your customer. If you are my representative on either a city, state, or federal level, it is your job to understand the insights of what's going on, not to be outsourcing this stuff to a bunch of people who have some kind of magic machine that are going to tell you what to think. How does that make sense?
Well, and by the way, it's removed once, because it's not like you're looking at the raw data. The data is
all right, and it's
sent to the media, and then the media massages it again.
Right.
So all of a sudden, they're telling you what your opinion should be.
Yeah.
Or supposedly.
Well, anyway. my opinion is we killed this to death. So.
Right.
Right.
No. Well, here's my opinion. Political polling should be rare and shared reluctantly. as opposed to shared frequently and widely.
Yeah, I understand it. If I'm running for office, that I should get access to research or a poll or whatever that's telling me so I can figure stuff out. I get that. It's the publicizing of it all over the place where I say, I don't know there's a necessity for that. I don't need to know what other people are thinking. First of all, I don't have that much respect for most other folks' thinking thought anyway, but I have a hard enough time respecting my own thought, never mind anybody else's. So
Those that are watching this, thank you.
For what?
Well, thank you because while we don't really care about your opinions, we're happy you took the time to listen to us.
Yeah, obviously, since we're doing this. Okay, anyway, that does make sense. Goodbye.
Bye.